Yeah. Hi all. My name is Sam, a shorter version of Sambut. I'm currently leading data and AI team at Philips. I'm currently focused on building data products and AI products which will solve business problem. So I have close to 17 years of experience in executing digital transformation and large scale program delivery. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Maybe as we kind of warm into the questions and the topic of governance today, we can just start off by talking a little bit about your companies for any of the audience members that might not be familiar with the companies and the kind of the focal point where you guys are coming from. So if you can share a bit about the background of your organizations and how you guys are looking at data and AI specifically, and then we can go into more specifics.
Sure. Shall I go first? The Turing Institute is a research institute. It's got a wide range of programs across AI in defense, in environment, in health. My part is focused particularly on government. So we're thinking about how government can get the best out of these technologies, as I was saying. The focus right now is thinking about how generative AI, especially, can be used for secure and trustworthy automation of bureaucratic processes, trying to save the time, especially of skilled public sector professionals, doctors, teachers, social workers, police officers, who spend 20 or 30 or 40% of their week doing bureaucracy, trying to save some of that time, reduce that bureaucratic workload on them. And so our real research focus is on understanding how you can do this, how you can do this at scale, which I know is one of the focus of this panel, and how you can do it in a responsible and ethical and trustworthy way, thinking about all the various governance challenges. And I think that's what, now we've seen generative AI burst into public consciousness. Yeah, everyone's been talking about it for the last year or more, but now really thinking about how doing the hard work of actually implementing that in a service is the focus right now.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Sam?
Yeah, I think in the last 15 years or so, I have been heavily involved in large-scale digital transformation, majority around data engineering and data science project, and especially last 5 years, I'm focused on building products which are uh, data products and AI products which sits on top of it. So we have strong and unified data platform which can support both data as well as AI needs. And in last 5 years, it's all about migrating the workloads from on-premise big data systems to cloud, and further how these products, be it data or AI, can be used to solve business problem across industries. So I have varied experience with automotive and now with healthcare. Yeah. So I think that's on a nutshell about what are my expertise and what are the key things in which I've executed in last 5 to 10 years.
Okay, awesome. Let's dive into it. I really appreciate it. Um, just to kick things off, how can organizations ensure they are implementing ethical practices when scaling in AI? And feel free to define ethics to begin with. I think that's without getting too much into philosophy outside of things. I think
Yeah.
different things to various organizations, people, cultures, countries. And since we have a good representation over here, maybe Jonathan, you can kick things off in terms of that.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I think this is a critical question, and I think ethics encompasses a whole range of practices around responsible innovation, thinking about privacy, thinking about transparency and users actually understanding what's going on, thinking about bias and discrimination, whether your system is performing well for all of the different groups that might be using it, not just one group or not just the majority group. That I think there's a lot of different facets to it, and I think one of the things that really interested me about this panel was its focus on scaling AI solutions, and I think this is really critical because if we can't scale solutions, then we won't get any benefit out of them. So for AI to realize the benefits, it has to operate at scale, and there's a few critical challenges that this scale raises, which are worth thinking about in ethics terms. One of them is how can we meaningfully do human in the loop? human in the loop is often sort of brought up as a kind of catch-all solution to, well, if you've got any worries about bias or discrimination or quality decision making, we'll keep the human in the loop of the decision, and they can have the final say. But if you want to do things at scale, and scale either meaning like high volume or meaning very fast or a combination of these, then having human in the loop is not easy, or it's going to be very expensive if you really want humans in the loop of all of those transactions. So how to do that, I think, is a really critical question. And then the second scale specific thing I'd highlight is edge cases. The more and more scale you have, the more likely you are to hit an unusual edge case, which perhaps wasn't particularly visible when you were testing the system, because you weren't able to test at the same scale that it's actually deployed at. If we look at what Gemini has been going through recently in the press, one way of thinking about that is system hitting some cases which weren't previously obvious in testing, but which became apparent when it was deployed essentially at a very, very large scale that anyone could use it. So thinking about these two things, how to meaningfully have human in the loop and how to handle edge cases that perhaps you're not going to be able to test for before deployment, to the kind of key ethics challenges I bring up when scaling solutions.
Yeah, you brought up a fascinating point about production and like the free market determining what the success factors would be, and part of that success is definitely embedded within that is the thought process of governance and how that tails to building the products and also iterating. I think the philosophy of just constant change being the only constant in this industry is definitely fascinating, and how the market responds to Gemini, and of course the public valuation of things, and kind of the very public feedback loop in that equation. Was a really good case study. Sam, do you have any thoughts on this topic of within governance and what type of frameworks that we could embed within
Yep.
organizations?
Yeah, I think let me repeat the question, right? So it's about how organization can scale using responsibility, ethics, and strong governance, right? So the way I see is, the starting point should be each of the organization, be it technology industries or organizations which wants to adopt some of these forefront large scale LLMs. It's really important to have strong.
It's all good, Sam. Feel free to join back whenever.
Yeah, sorry for that. I'm back, guys.
No worries. It's all good.
All right. So, let me repeat. I think the starting point is having a strong guiding principles, right? So, for example, if you take off Google or OpenAI, they have openly communicated the guiding principles based upon which they are approaching, scaling AI. So, I think that is really important. And then, second stage is, security or scalability or responsibility by design itself. It's not something which is like an afterthought, but designing right when these LLMs are designed, a fair bit of governance, strong governance and scaling principles needs to be applied. And not just that, it needs to have a strong DevSecOps process also, the traditional software engineering practices which needs to follow. And even when the models get deployed into production, we need to ensure that we have good monitoring and auditing capabilities in order to govern these models, right? And we have seen cases where performance of this model gets hallucinated over a period of time. So it's really important to monitor and audit them, and this would be really helpful when these product goes to for public use, and when regulatory obligations comes into picture, right? So we need to have strong evidences to support that the models or the scaling which we are doing for our models is not biased, or it is fair. It provides equal information for all the genders or region, or it could be, it should be imperative of any of the bias which is prevalent in an entire world. Yeah, I think that's on a nutshell. Definitely, as we move on, we will get into in detail of how and what about, like, what are the nitty gritty details behind some of these things. Yeah.
Thanks for touching on those topics. Speaking of policy changes or aspects within organizations, do you guys feel there are policy level changes needed? And if so, what changes at the policy level do we think we need or don't need in AI governance to ensure possible scaling? And I think a lot of this is we're seeing that market factors dictating this. We're seeing internal organizations, our own teams, but at the policy level, are there changes do you feel that that need to be instituted in sometime in the foreseeable future, Jonathan?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think one of the key things that I'd highlight about generative AI is that it's really challenged our whole vocabulary around how we think about assurance of AI systems, how we measure their accuracy, and a lot of the truisms around how we think about training them, for example. And I think we do have to recognize that a lot of our frameworks for managing AI were developed in the era of narrow AI, where you had a system that was doing one thing, was making one prediction, making one decision, making one ranking, or something like that. It was kind of doing one thing. Because it was doing one thing, you had a whole kind of framework for trying to understand whether it was doing that thing well, whether it was doing it badly, whether it was doing it in a biased way, whether it was doing it in a responsible way. Sometimes those frameworks weren't applied, but you kind of had that framework. And I think generative AI, which is part of the field of broad AI, AI that can do several different things, or perhaps even lots of different things, and which is creating bits of text which are much harder to evaluate whether they're right or wrong, or they might contain claims within them that are contestable. It's not obvious whether they're right or wrong. So I think one of the parts of the policy that needs to change, or at least there needs to be understanding around this, is that we can't just fall back on our existing AI assurance principles and expect them to map perfectly over to this new world. Things like garbage in, garbage out, for example. This is something we used to say all the time for predictive systems. It's much less clear for generative systems. There's much less pruning of only high quality data going in to ensure high quality output. And lots of the big teams that I hear talking about generative AI have actually sort of said, well, we do very little pre-processing of our data. That's just not the way we think about ensuring quality. So garbage is going in, but garbage is not coming out. Now, what those policies changes actually are, I mean, that's perhaps a whole another larger discussion. And I think we're still at the beginnings of really figuring out how can we assure a scaled AI product like in the sort of generative AI category. But I think it does start off with recognizing that a lot of the existing practices aren't just going to translate perfectly into this new world.
Definitely. Sam, is there anything that you would like to add to this in terms of policy level changes?
Yeah, sure. I see this as a two-way process, right? First, if you look at most of the tech pioneers in large language models or AI models, it's kind of self-regulated, right? The amount of progress which has been made by regulatory bodies, right? For example, the EU AI Act, or something similar in US, there are no standard policies or regulations or governance. They are coming up with the massive adoptions of chat gpt and other thing. I think the last 6 months has been a rapid scaling of AI in terms of at least available for general public. But in terms of regulation, they are on the way, I would say, right? And so far we are at the mercy of some of these large scale AI vendors, right, who have their self regulation mechanism of how they would like to build some of these models. So it begins with, and as Jonathan rightly point out, around the data quality, or the what policies we have, what type of data needs to be used. So initiatives such as certified data provider or having a data contracts would enable trust in those data. And when this data is used for training and validations of AI model, I think that's where it would truly hit the responsibility and ethics parts of model development. So data is one. And other thing which needs to be which needs to be really taken care is how these models are validated, or what are the mechanism through which evaluation can be done. For example, even getting deployed, or what should be the potential launch strategy, right? So if you look at some of the recent production launches which happened with with Gemini, I think it was it was not well received, and it was a bit not received very well. So I think it's really important to have policy on each of the modules which would be useful for building the overall life cycle. It could be data, it could be the ML ops, the pipeline through which the model gets built, how it would be validated, and how those models are pushed and deployed for enterprise or public use. So it cut across that, and we need a strong policy and a framework surrounding it.
I think it's you mentioned a really valuable point about like evaluating each step in the life cycle of Gen AI or LLMs or each of these different tools, and across the touch points, maybe different evaluation methods and different policies would be there in place. It kind of reminds me back to the early days of cryptocurrencies or blockchain or pretty much any new emerging technology.
Yep.
It was a stage of kind of a wild west and free markets, and then there's a moment of like external regulation and internal regulation. And I think AI's moment is yet to be kind of well defined in that area because things have been very exponential. And I think if organizations like Philips and others, like if we start to look at how data can be extracted in a meaningful way within the confines of c- being concerned about customer experience and overall governance practices, then at least whenever external policy changes comes into place, we'll be ready for it and we'll kind of define that channel as opposed to being reactionary. It would be a bit more proactive, but at least we can hope and fingers crossed when that happens, so that it balances where we want technology to be, but without, of course, like constricting the growth within these fields. Speaking of
Yep.
collaboration, what ways interdisciplinary collaboration could be leveraged, do you guys think, to enhance the ethical framework surrounding AI? Jonathan?
I mean, yeah, it's another really good question. I think I know we're not talking about generative AI solely here, but it is the thing on everyone's lips, and I think it is again worth thinking about it in this respect. You know, when you're launching a Gen AI technology, and I noticed one of the comments from the audience is sort of along these lines, you're dealing with a technology that can just do such a range of different things that
Yeah.
you need to have collaboration in order to understand potential harms emerging, because it's a technology that can touch on all sorts of different areas or sectors of society. So one of the critical things from my point of view is that if you want to ensure AI safety, you don't just need AI engineers in the room. You need other people who understand all sorts of different harm types, all sorts of different safety types. And for a big public facing chatbot, this runs a massive gamut from people who understand healthy eating habits or first aid to people who understand nuclear safety or people who understand financial crime, these kind of things. So I think that this sort of collaboration is really, really crucial in understanding safe product deployments. Again, I think we're at the early stages of really getting to grips with, how will these companies ensure truly safe deployment of this technologies. But interdisciplinarity is clearly a big part of it.
Right. Sam?
Yeah, so I think uh, it should be a joint exercise between three personas, right? So one would be the tech pioneers, who are producing this Gen AI and other AI products. Second persona would be the industry experts, be it automotive, finance, healthcare, retail, etc., right? So we need to have leaders coming from there. Those would be the second important personas. And third would be the regulatory bodies or country specific regulations, right? These three things needs to be scaled simultaneously, just to figure it out what are the common synergies which we can see across industries, right? It could be related to data privacy, it could be related to how model needs to be built, right? So the use cases might be different across industries, but again, when we talk about at large about responsibility, scaling them with governance, I think some of those foundational principles would be same. And if we can agree at those foundation principles, I think that would set up a good base for develop further and becoming narrow towards a particular specialization for a particular industry. So I think that's how I see it. It's really important to have these three dimensions taken care. The tech industry, the technology specific leaders involvement, plus the regulatory bodies. Those three, I think we need to make equal developments, in my opinion.
I appreciate that. I think the tripartite approach is probably the safest approach and a balanced approach in terms of like mitigating the risks as well as having a kind of a joint win-win game theory approach to moving the industry forward. There's a bunch of questions around like from the audience around biases and the different types of output mediums and things like deep fakes and AI twins and videos and just monitoring responsible content um, of the AI output processes. So maybe we can just combine all that and saying like what type of um, regulation or oversight do you think it should exist or is self-elected, and a lot of this processes is, as you guys are touching on this is by companies just kind of iterating and learning from the market feedback and also just making sure that their own brand is on the line when it comes to generating so much output capability. So um, what are your thoughts on that? And I know this is still an area that's very nascent, so looking forward to hearing your thoughts in terms of how we monitor and apply governance principles to what is the production or the outputs of these AI models.
Mm.
Sure. Yeah, Jonathan, would like to go?
You go ahead. You go ahead.
All right. So, yeah, I think talking of biases, I think it's really important. I think the amount of time and energy is spent on some of these AI project is humongous, right? If you talk about the infrastructure or the GPUs burnt in order to train these models, plus it's really important to ensure that we have strong evaluations and governance throughout the life cycle, I would say. Be it it could be databases, as we know, most of these models are trained using the publicly available data or the data which is easily available, right? So I think we need to understand different types of biases. It could be context bias, it could be machine generated bias, or it could be anything of that sort. So we need to ensure that we have strong validation and evaluation mechanism, right? So just to give you an example, right? So it starts with what is our guiding principles, what are the KPIs which are going to drive those guiding principles, and how we ensure that those guiding principles are translated during engineering and design, right? For example, when you are designing an LLM model, we could think of what should be the content filtering mechanism. For example, if I want to talk about Azure AI Studio, right? There is something called Azure AI content filter, right? So which takes care of some of these biases, right? So likewise, even with OpenAI, they have these bias mitigations built across the life cycle, be it at a model or platform level, or be it at application level. So when we talk about application level, that's where the large scale validations comes into picture, the adversarial effects, or testing for the negative scenarios, or how potentially someone could harm the by using an LM. So those are some of the scenarios using which we could potentially validate and ensure that end to end validation is taken care. So in a nutshell, I think it's not like just when a model is getting deployed into production we need to think about that. Rather, it should be a well planned during the principles, during the design, during the platform implementation, and when things are put into production. So
Well said. Thank
go ahead,
you,
Dennis. Yeah.
Jonathan.
Yeah, just to add very briefly to that, I mean, I completely agree with it. And I just think, again, it's sort of really worth bearing in mind the paradigm shift here between the previous AI applications and current generative AI applications. I think if you're talking about a previous sort of predictive model, which may be trained already on data within the company or within the organization, you may well expect to see new data coming in that you hadn't previously been able to trial on. But it would be reasonable to expect that new, novel data to be relatively limited. In generative AI, terms, it's only possible to trial and validate on such a tiny, small percentage of all the total inputs that your model is going to get once it's in the wild, that this sort of like pre-hoc validation really in a way kind of pales in comparison to what you have to do after the model's actually been released. Of course, it's still extremely important to do it throughout the life cycle, but having very robust mechanisms for validating what's going on with these models after they've been released and making sure that problems are dealt with quickly and efficiently is of critical importance. And this, it gets back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is something that's really hard to scale. If you're dealing with, hundreds of millions of customer interactions, even if customers start flagging results to you that they think are inappropriate, it's going to be hard to deal with those at scale. But yeah, working on that sort of post hoc evaluation aspect is really key for me.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Just since we have 3 minutes, I'll quickly add some more questions from the audience. Um, do you see the convergence of any emerging technologies, things like blockchain, in terms of like defining what truth would be and like watermarking and any of the kind of convergence in past references, or any other tools that you feel that might help with both ownership of this as well as regulating the governance aspects of what the outputs might be within AI.
I mean, it's a massive subject.
Yeah.
I'll just say something very briefly, and then Sam can come in. I mean, I think right at the moment there's seems like there's reasonable potential for watermarking to work for video, audio, and image. But of course, you have to have the compliance of the person that's actually built the system, and there are many systems that will be built that won't have the watermarks in them. And I think that there isn't much evidence that watermarking is going to work really well for text. I think in general, we need to sort of deal with the facts, as a society, as a global society, that we're moving into an age where we can't immediately believe the authenticity of a video or an audio file or an image that's put in front of us. And so institutions that kind of verify that somehow, and that comment says, it's part of that, there'll be industries around that sort of trust and credibility, it seems. Having robust institutions that verify that is extremely important.
Absolutely appreciate that. So just maybe to wrap things up, what are your thoughts on accountability? Are there mechanisms that you feel in the future there'll be kind of a watershed moment for AI and privacy and governance that will kind of catalyze these experiences into something that's more policy driven, or do you feel it's going to be more driven by companies that are players within the space? And or is there accountability that you feel like companies should take ownership of the outputs and the outcomes of it?
Sam, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think to conclude, what I would say is responsible AI equal to successful AI, right? It doesn't matter how much time and energy a particular organization spends on building those model. If it is not built responsibility, there would be no industry-wide adoption or no public adoption, and we have seen examples of those. So that's why I strongly feel that building AI systems through the right ethics, responsibility, and governance is paramount, and it is not just the last piece of the puzzle, but it is the central pipeline which is really required, and all other models and other aspects of building AI model should be around it, right? And at this point in time, it's all with the self-regulated tech industries way. I think they are defining what are the frameworks and what are the policies, and et cetera, et cetera. But I strongly feel that equal contributions, or a lot of emphasis needs to be coming from regulatory bodies also, and this is not something new, right? So there have been strong regulations on automotive or medical or retail industries in terms of data privacy, GDPR, CCPA. There's several actions going around. It's just matter of how this can be applied to this new gen AI type of systems. And I believe as more and more use cases come in, and I think at the scale which this AI and AI based systems are evolving, I'm sure that each of the countries and regulatory bodies are taking a note of it, and they will definitely come up with framework which would introduce fairness, transparency, accountability, ethics, right? So I think that's my take on this.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Any closing remarks? I appreciate that. I think that's a good note to end off on. Responsible AI is good AI, and it's good for the industry, and self-regulating and meeting kind of halfway when it comes to the between the tri-party perspectives is a good
Yeah.
look forward. Jonathan, any last comments?
100%, 100%. And I think just innovating in regulatory terms is really going to be needed in the coming years. I think policy is playing catch up at the moment. And yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in getting that tripart solution to actually work effectively.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm Ashar. It's been a pleasure hosting this, and thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Sam, and thanks everyone for listening in. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all. Thanks for the opportunity.